In a bustling airport, a 39-year-old black mechanic stood just moments away from the flight that held the promise of transforming his family's future. Yet everything changed when he paused to stand up for an elderly woman facing harassment. By stepping in, he missed his flight and the crucial interview that awaited him on the other side. In that instant, it seemed as though his one opportunity had slipped through his fingers. What he could never have anticipated was that the woman he chose to protect was one of the most influential leaders in the aviation industry, and her gratitude would soon unfold in ways that would forever alter the course of his life. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartwarming stories every day. The Arizona sun was just beginning to rise when Malik Thompson guided his aging pickup truck into the overnight parking structure at Phoenix Sky Harbor. The engine sputtered wearily, as if pleading for one last chance to rest. Malik eased the door shut with care, mindful of every creak and groan that hinted at the vehicle's age. He slung his well-worn work backpack over his shoulder and glanced at the time on his phone's cracked screen. With his flight departing soon, he had little time to spare. He drew in a deep breath, one that carried the weight of many years. Those years had been filled with long shifts at a struggling garage, with reassuring his daughter Zara that brighter days lay ahead, and with juggling bills that always seemed ready to explode. Today represented more than just another flight. It was his first genuine chance in over a decade. The position at Silverhawk Automotive as a senior technical specialist offered a salary that could finally provide stability, health insurance that his mother Evelyn desperately needed, and a schedule that might allow him to attend Zara's school events instead of always apologizing for missing them. It wasn't a glamorous role, but it felt like air to breathe after years of holding his breath. He quickened his pace toward the terminal, his boots striking the concrete with purpose as the desert heat began to build around him. His mind replayed the phone call from the previous week. The final interview was set for Monday in person with the director, and he couldn't afford to be late. He had been punctual for everything since that call, until this morning when Zara's asthma flared up early. He had stayed by her side, soothing her until her breathing calmed. He couldn't leave her in distress, not after losing her mother, not after vowing to always be there. Now, with his heart pounding and his legs moving with uncharacteristic speed, he hurried past families with strollers, business travelers with sleek luggage, and tourists already sporting Grand Canyon souvenirs. The airport hummed with that unique blend of anticipation and urgency that only early flights seem to create. For a brief moment, Malik felt as though he belonged among the purposeful crowd. He was finally heading toward something that mattered. Yet even as he pressed forward, a quiet voice in the back of his mind reminded him of the hard truth. There was no backup plan. This journey couldn't be rescheduled with a credit card he didn't possess. The company wouldn't bend its rules for him. He knew all too well that opportunities rarely waited for men in his position. Still, he kept moving. He thought of his mother Evelyn, her determined smile masking the pain in her legs as she moved slowly around the kitchen each morning. He thought of Zara, her bright eyes behind oversized glasses, and the gentle way she had handed him a small drawing the night before. Two simple stick figures, one larger and one smaller, standing beside an airplane. "For your big day, Daddy," she had said. He had tucked that drawing into his wallet like a promise he was determined to keep. As he approached the sliding glass doors of Terminal 4, he wiped the sweat from his forehead and whispered to himself, "Come on, Malik. Not today. Not today." The doors parted, releasing a wave of cool air that washed over his face like a small mercy. Inside, the terminal buzzed with life, announcements echoing overhead, wheels rolling across the floor, voices blending into a steady stream of motion. Malik scanned for the security checkpoint, mentally calculating which line might move fastest. He angled toward the leftmost lane, noticing a group of military personnel passing through quickly. For the first time that morning, a flicker of hope stirred in his chest. He could still make it if he kept going, but just as that thought took hold, something on his right caught his attention. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but something in the rhythm of the terminal felt off, a subtle tremor in the air. Malik slowed, his instincts sharpening. Near the drop-off area, an elderly woman stood clutching her purse tightly to her chest, her shoulders hunched inward as if trying to disappear. Two men stood close on either side of her. They were neatly dressed, with tidy haircuts that might have made most people second-guess their suspicions. But their body language told a different story. One leaned in too closely, while the other blocked her path. The woman wasn't arguing. She was frozen in place. That kind of stillness came from fear, not guilt. Malik took in the scene quickly. The taller man pointed accusingly at a small scrape on his arm. The other waved a phone in her face, as if recording the moment. Fragments of their words reached him. "You bumped me. This is assault. We can call the police unless you want to settle this right now." It was a classic airport scam. Smooth, quiet, and over in a flash. What struck Malik hardest wasn't the scam itself. It was the way the woman's hands trembled. That same helpless, defeated tremor he had seen in his own mother's hands the day someone tried to pressure her into signing a fraudulent home maintenance contract. That memory hit him like a jolt. Boarding time was approaching fast. He could still make his flight if he kept walking, but his feet refused to move. One of the men placed a hand on the handle of the woman's suitcase, effectively trapping her. She whispered something soft and apologetic, the sound of someone trying to diffuse danger. The taller man stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. That was the moment Malik's direction changed. He didn't rush in shouting or causing a scene. He simply walked toward them with steady, purposeful steps that conveyed he wasn't looking for trouble, but wouldn't back down from it either. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm yet firm as he drew near. "Are you all right here?" The shorter man turned first, his eyes assessing Malik like an unexpected complication. The taller one straightened, adopting the false bravado that scammers often wore. "This doesn't concern you, man. She hit me with her bag. We're handling it." The woman shook her head weakly. "I didn't. Malik positioned himself between them, creating space for her without aggression. "Ma'am," he repeated, keeping his focus on her. "Do you need help?" Her reply was quiet but clear enough. "Yes." The taller scammer scoffed. "Look, hero, we don't want any problems. She owes us for damages, that's all." Malik didn't rise to the bait. "Hey," he said evenly, "there are cameras all over this place. If something happened, security can sort it out." That single statement chipped away at their confidence. The shorter man shifted uneasily. The taller one forced a laugh that rang hollow. "We don't have time for that. We're being reasonable." "Great," Malik replied. "Then you won't mind waiting around for a few minutes." He reached for his phone to call security, but before he could, the taller man made a critical error. He grabbed the woman's arm, not violently, but firmly enough to make her flinch and gasp. Something ignited in Malik. He moved forward and gently but firmly loosened the man's grip, careful not to escalate but clear in his message. "Don't touch her." The scammer jerked his hand back and looked around, suddenly aware of the attention they had drawn. A few nearby travelers had paused to watch. The energy in the air had shifted. Scammers relied on silence and speed. Attention was their enemy. The shorter one muttered, "Forget this," and pulled at the other's sleeve. They retreated quickly into the flow of arriving passengers before security arrived. The woman let out a shaky breath, as if she had been holding it for far too long. Malik turned to her, his tone softening. "You okay, ma'am?" She nodded, though her eyes were glassy and her voice unsteady. "Thank you. I don't know what would have—" Before she could finish, a security officer approached, having been alerted by a witness. He took their statements and asked for Malik's name and contact information for the report. Then he turned to the woman. "Ma'am, are you traveling alone?" She nodded again, still pale. He offered to escort her inside, but she declined, insisting she was fine, though her body language suggested otherwise. When she attempted to lift her suitcase, her hands trembled again. Malik recognized the moment for what it was. The terminal entrance was only steps away. He could hurry through security, hope for a short line, and perhaps still salvage his chance at Silverhawk. But as he looked at her, really looked, he saw how hard she was fighting to hold herself together with nothing but pride. Something in him made the decision. He had been raised never to walk past someone in need, even when it came at a personal cost. "Let me help you get inside," he said quietly. She blinked, surprised. "I don't want to make you late." "It's all right," he replied, with a small smile that hid the tightening in his chest. "Come on, let's get you checked in." Without fanfare, Malik turned away from his own flight and toward the choice that would soon change everything. After the security officer finished and left, the woman's shoulders sagged as if the last thread of strength had snapped. She took a step, but her knees wobbled, and she caught the railing for balance. Malik reacted instantly, steadying her arm. Up close, he could hear the thin strain in her breathing. Not panic, but deep exhaustion layered beneath the fear. "You sure you're all right?" he asked gently. She nodded, but it was the kind of nod people give when they don't want to be a burden. "I'm fine, just a little shaken." A little shaken hardly captured it. Her fingers trembled as she tried to adjust her purse strap, and when she bent to lift her suitcase, she couldn't manage it. Malik didn't let her try again. "I got that," he said, lifting the suitcase and her smaller bag with ease. She started to protest, but he stopped her with the same steady calm he used with his mother. "Let me carry these. You focus on breathing." She exhaled a shaky laugh. "Thank you. I'm not usually this flustered. It was a lot." "Anybody would be shaken," Malik replied. They moved slowly into the terminal. He matched her careful pace, scanning for a place she could rest, but she shook her head. "Please, I just need to get through security. Once I'm past that, I'll be fine." He didn't argue, though fine wasn't the word he would have chosen. She was fighting hard to preserve her dignity, and he respected that. "All right," he said, shifting her bags. "Which airline?" "Gate 52C, she answered quietly, holding out her crumpled boarding pass. Malik glanced at the gate number and felt his chest tighten. It was a long walk, and they would have to move slowly. He could feel precious minutes slipping away, but he said nothing. He guided her to a quieter security line, one where she wouldn't feel rushed or jostled. As they waited, her breathing steadied gradually. At the conveyor belt, she hesitated again, her hands trembling as she tried to lift her purse onto the tray. Malik placed all her items on the belt with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to physical work. "You go ahead," he said, nodding toward the metal detector. "I'll grab everything on the other side." She passed through carefully, raising her arms slowly and wincing slightly. When she emerged, she looked back at him with a mixture of apology and gratitude, the look of someone unaccustomed to being helped. On the other side, Malik gathered her belongings. A TSA agent glanced their way, but seeing him handling everything confidently, turned away. Once everything was packed, the woman took a slow sip from the water bottle he had given her. "I'm sorry for slowing you down," she murmured. "You're not slowing me down," Malik replied gently. He didn't add that even if she were, it wouldn't have mattered. They began the long walk toward Gate 52. The airport bustled around them, children laughing, suitcases rattling, announcements cutting through the air, but their pace remained steady and quiet. Every so often, Malik checked if she needed to stop, but she always shook her head, determined to keep going. About halfway there, her steps faltered. She reached for a wall to steady herself. "I'm sorry," she whispered, closing her eyes for a moment. "I didn't eat this morning. Foolish of me." Without hesitation, Malik guided her to a nearby cafe kiosk. "Sit," he said, lowering her gently onto a bench. "I'll get something." "You don't have to," she said. "I do," he replied simply. He bought her a small tea, a muffin, and a protein bar. Nothing extravagant, just enough to restore her strength. It was the last of the cash in his wallet, but he didn't pause to consider it. When he handed her the food, she looked at him as if seeing more than a kind stranger, as if studying the way he moved, the way he spoke, the way he kept choosing to help even when he had every reason not to. "What brings you to the airport today?" she asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. Malik tried to downplay it. "Job interview," he said with a shrug. "A big one." Her eyes drifted to a nearby screen. The flight to Seattle was flashing in bright orange. "Final boarding. That's yours," she whispered. He looked up, then down at his hands. His jaw tightened for a moment, but he kept his expression steady. "Yeah," he said softly. "It was." She stared at him, horrified. "You missed it because of me." Malik shook his head at once. "No, I stayed because you needed help. That's the right call. Always is." He didn't explain how much the interview had meant or how tightly his life had been stretched. He carried those burdens quietly, the way he carried everything else. She watched him for a long moment. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice low but full. He stood, lifting her bags once more. "Come on, ma'am. Let's get you to that gate." They walked the rest of the way together, him a step behind, her leaning slightly toward him as if his presence made the world feel steadier. Neither of them knew it yet, but this unhurried walk through the terminal marked the beginning of something that would rewrite both their lives. By the time they reached Gate 52C, the last passengers were boarding. Her flight number blinked in bold red. Final call. She straightened as the adrenaline of nearly missing her own flight seemed to lift her. "Thank you," she said again, her voice steadier now. "I can take it from here." Malik nodded and set her carry-on beside her. She touched his arm in a brief, trembling gesture. Simple. Human. Then she stepped into the boarding line and disappeared down the jet bridge. The moment she was gone, the adrenaline drained from Malik all at once. He turned and looked up at the departure board. Flight 741. Gate closed. He froze. Not angry, not surprised, just still. The way someone becomes when reality settles with perfect clarity. He walked to an empty row of seats near a window, dropped his backpack onto the chair beside him, and finally let his shoulders slump for the first time that morning. His heart no longer raced. It beat with a slow, heavy rhythm that echoed in his ribs. He pulled out his phone. The battery was nearly dead, the screen flickering. He tried to open the airline app, but the phone shut off before it could load. He reached for a charger in his wallet out of habit, then remembered he had given his only portable battery to Zara the night before because her tablet kept dying during homework. "Daddy, it's fine," she had said. "You can use it tomorrow." She always spoke of tomorrow as if it were guaranteed. Malik looked around for an outlet, but the ones nearby were already taken. He could have asked someone to share, but he wasn't in the mood to explain. He ran a hand over his face, trying to think of what came next. Rebooking was too expensive. Borrowing a phone might help, but who would he call? And what words could possibly fix this? Asking for a same-day interview was pointless. Silverhawk had been clear that it had to be in person. This wasn't just a missed flight. It was a missed chance. His stomach growled loudly enough that a couple across from him glanced over, but he ignored it. He had already spent his last cash on the woman's tea, muffin, and the protein bar. He wasn't complaining. He would make the same choice again. But now the consequences pressed down on him like a weight. He leaned back against the cold seat and stared at the ceiling. Airport announcements continued around him. Gate changes. Boarding calls for cities he wouldn't see today. Everything moved forward while he remained stuck in place. Minutes passed, perhaps longer. The morning crowds thinned, replaced by quieter travelers heading to midday flights. At some point, he closed his eyes just to rest them, telling himself it would only be for a moment. But fatigue had been waiting. The nerves from the night before, the early morning caregiving, the sprint through the terminal, the adrenaline of intervening, all of it crashed over him at once. He drifted into sleep, not by choice, but because his body decided it was finished negotiating. When he woke, the light outside had softened into a gentler blue. The afternoon had advanced. He blinked, disoriented, before the memory of where he was and why his chest felt tight returned. His flight was long gone. The interview window had closed. Whatever shot he had was over. He straightened, rubbing the stiffness from his neck. The terminal now moved to a different rhythm. Fewer families, more solo travelers, the sound of suitcase wheels like faint echoes on polished floors. A janitor pushed a cart nearby, humming softly. Somewhere in the distance, a ringtone played. The entire place felt as though it had moved on without him. Malik sat with his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. He didn't cry or curse. That wasn't his way. But a heavy sadness settled into his chest, a quiet ache born from knowing he had tried, worked, and hoped, only to end up back in the same place he had fought so hard to leave. Out of habit more than intention, he reached into his wallet. His fingers brushed against a folded slip of paper the woman had given him earlier. He had nearly forgotten it. He unfolded it slowly, expecting perhaps a simple thank you or an apology. Instead, in small, steady handwriting, it read, "Do not leave the airport." Signed with the initials LW. He stared at the words once, twice, a third time. They didn't change or become clearer. It felt deliberate, too calm to be accidental. Why would she write this? How had she known he would still be here? Why did she want him to stay? A small, undeniable spark flickered in his chest. Not quite hope, but something close. The feeling of a locked door shifting just enough to suggest it might open after all. He folded the note again, more slowly this time. He didn't know what was coming. He only knew one thing. He was not leaving that airport. The airport had settled into that strange, late-day quiet, neither fully calm nor empty. When the automatic doors behind him hissed open, letting in a rush of warm desert air, Malik didn't look up immediately. He was still turning the folded note over in his hands, rereading the same 6 words as if they might suddenly reveal their meaning. A shadow fell across the floor in front of him, sharp and deliberate, stopping precisely where his boots rested. It wasn't the uncertain shuffle of a traveler seeking a seat, or the slow movement of a janitor. This was purposeful. Malik lifted his gaze. A man in a charcoal gray uniform stood before him, the kind of uniform rarely seen in commercial terminals. Crisp lines, polished shoes, a nameplate Malik couldn't read from where he sat. The man held himself with the stillness of someone trained to wait for the right moment. "Mr. Thompson?" the man asked. Malik wondered if he had misheard. "Yeah?" The uniformed man nodded once, precise. "Ma'am is ready for you." "Ma'am?" Malik echoed. "Yes, sir," the man said, stepping aside and gesturing toward the sliding doors. "She asked me to escort you." Escort. Not help. Not guide. Escort. A word that didn't belong in Malik's world. He rose slowly, his muscles stiff from sitting so long. "I think you've got the wrong guy," he said. "Who exactly is—" He never finished the question. Beyond the uniformed man, just outside the doorway, a sleek black SUV idled at the curb. The rear passenger door opened with smooth precision, and a pair of polished heels touched the pavement first. Then she stepped out, and everything Malik thought he understood about this day rearranged itself. The frail, shaken woman he had helped through the terminal was gone. In her place stood a commanding presence. Eleanor Whitfield stood tall in a tailored navy blazer and silk blouse, her silver hair pinned into an elegant twist. Her shoulders were squared, her expression composed, and her eyes held a sharpness that suggested she saw further than most. It was her, yet it wasn't. The transformation struck Malik so forcefully that words failed him for a moment. She offered him a warm, measured smile, the kind that conserved energy yet still reached her eyes. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice steady and confident, nothing like the fragile whisper from earlier. "I told you not to leave." That single sentence sent a rush of adrenaline through him, confusion mixing with something he couldn't yet name. He stepped closer, searching her face. "Ma'am, are you— earlier you—" "I'm perfectly fine," she said. Her tone held a touch of apology, but no weakness. Earlier was a different matter entirely. Before he could ask more, she nodded toward the SUV. "Come, we have much to discuss." He looked between her polished shoes, the luxury vehicle, the driver now holding the door open, and back at her. None of it matched the woman whose bags he had carried just hours earlier. He tried again. "Ma'am, I don't understand what's happening." She gave a soft laugh, as if she had expected exactly this reaction. "You will," she said. Then, lifting her chin slightly, she added, "But first, let me reintroduce myself." She extended her hand, steady, confident, no trace of a tremor. "I'm Eleanor Whitfield, CEO of North Star Aviation Group." The words landed with physical force, not because he knew her company intimately, but because even those outside aviation recognized the name. North Star wasn't merely an airline, it was a global aviation powerhouse, private fleets, maintenance schools, pilot training, aerospace contracts. The kind of company that could shape cities and careers. He stared at her, speechless. "I imagine this is unexpected," she said gently. He let out a stunned breath. "That's one way to put it." She glanced toward the terminal, scanning instinctively as someone accustomed to being recognized might. But no one was watching. No one in the busy airport seemed to realize a titan of the industry stood right there. "Why?" Malik asked, still struggling to piece it together. "Why were you out there alone?" "Because," she answered quietly, "sometimes the only way to truly understand a system is to experience it without anyone knowing who you are." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Something in her eyes suggested this went beyond a single scam incident, something internal, serious, and private. He exhaled slowly, grounding himself. "So what does that have to do with me?" Eleanor's gaze softened. "Everything, Mr. Thompson. Those men targeted me today, and no one else stopped. Not a single person except you. Despite your own urgent priorities, despite the personal cost, you intervened with integrity rather than anger, with calm rather than ego. That is rare." She paused, then added with quiet conviction, "And I value rare." The words sank in before he could fully process them. Then she nodded toward the open SUV door. "Please come with me." Malik hesitated only a second before curiosity and something deeper pulled him forward. He climbed into the SUV, settling into seats that felt as though they belonged to another world entirely. As the door closed with a soft click, he caught his reflection in the tinted window. Tired eyes, a worn shirt, calloused hands. A man who had arrived at the airport hoping for one opportunity and had somehow stepped directly into another. He couldn't begin to understand what it all meant. Eleanor slid in beside him, adjusting her blazer with instinctive grace. "Mr. Thompson," she said as the SUV pulled away from the curb. "Your day is not over." For the first time since dawn, Malik felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Quietly, but unmistakably, his life was changing. He simply didn't know yet how far it would go. The SUV glided along the airport's restricted access roads, passing security checkpoints that didn't bother to stop them. Malik sat with his backpack wedged between his knees, trying to appear as though he belonged in such soft leather and gentle air conditioning. Eleanor didn't speak much at first. She simply watched the tarmac through the tinted window, her fingers tapping lightly on the armrest as if keeping time with her thoughts. Every few seconds, Malik glanced her way, unsure whether he should sit at attention, relax, or brace himself. Nothing about this felt real. Minutes earlier, he had been helping a stranger who could barely lift her own purse. Now he sat beside the CEO of a global aviation powerhouse, being driven through a part of the airport most people never knew existed. The SUV made a final turn, and suddenly the runway lights came into view, long lines of gold reflecting off the evening haze. But what made Malik sit up straighter was the private jet parked near a gated area. Its sleek white body bore North Star's signature midnight blue stripe along the tail, and its engines gleamed under the setting sun. It wasn't a large commercial plane. It wasn't meant to be. It was the kind of aircraft used by executives who needed to move quickly and discreetly. The SUV slowed to a stop beside it. Malik blinked. We're getting on that?" Eleanor offered him a gentle, matter-of-fact smile. "Yes, I had a flight scheduled for Seattle this evening." "You need to go to Seattle. I'm simply adjusting my itinerary." He opened his mouth to protest, because this level of generosity, this level of access, didn't exist in his world. But she raised a hand lightly. "Before you argue, consider this. You helped me today without hesitation. Allow me to return the courtesy." He swallowed, unsure what to say. Unsure of the protocol when a woman of her stature told you to stop arguing and board her private jet. The driver opened the door. Malik stepped out, his legs unsteady, not from fear of flying, but from fear of what this moment signified. Not the money or the plane, but the shift, as though life had quietly turned a corner without asking his permission. The jet stairs lowered with a quiet, mechanical hum. A flight attendant in a North Star Navy uniform greeted them with polished professionalism. "Good evening, Ms. Whitfield. Mr. Thompson, welcome aboard." Hearing his name spoken with such certainty made Malik pause mid-step. He looked at the attendant, confused. You were expecting me." "We received the passenger update a short while ago," she said with a warm smile. "Your seat is ready, a short while ago." That meant Eleanor had added him to the manifest before the SUV even reached the tarmac. She had planned for him to come. She had planned for all of this. He stepped into the cabin, and for a moment the world narrowed to pure disbelief. The interior resembled a living room suspended in the sky, cream leather seats arranged to face one another, soft amber lighting, wood paneling that glowed warmly. There were no rows, no cramped aisles, just open space and quiet luxury. He hovered near the entrance until Eleanor gestured toward a seat across from hers. "Sit, Mr. Thompson, please." He lowered himself carefully, mindful not to scuff anything. The seat embraced him as if designed to make him forget the world outside. As the jet doors sealed with a low thump and the engines began their soft rumble, Malik felt the reality of the moment settle into his bones. He was on a private jet, flying to the interview he had believed lost forever, alongside a woman whose true identity had completely redirected the course of his day. When they leveled off in the sky, Eleanor turned fully toward him. Her posture shifted from traveling executive to someone ready for a genuine conversation. "Mr. Thompson," she began, "I'd like to explain something to you." He nodded cautiously. "I was in Phoenix today for a reason," she said. "Our company is preparing a major review of national airport safety protocols. We've been hearing reports of traveler scams at certain drop-off zones. I wanted to see for myself." Her expression tightened slightly. "Unfortunately, the rumors were true." Malik straightened. "Ma'am, I didn't mean to interfere with your—" "You didn't interfere," she cut in gently. "You intervened, and that's very different." For the first time, her voice softened in a way that felt personal. "I've watched people freeze when confronted with wrongdoing. They worry about the consequences. They look away. Today, you did not. Despite having everything to lose, you chose to do the right thing." Malik shifted in his seat. Compliments rarely sat comfortably on him. "I just didn't want someone getting hurt." "And that," she said, leaning back slightly, "is exactly why I sought you out." She opened a leather folder resting beside her. Inside were documents stamped with North Star's crest. Blueprints, facility layouts, flight maintenance schematics, training curriculums. He recognized some instantly: aviation mechanic training modules, engine diagrams, apprentice progression charts. One page stood out, a header that read, "Aviation Mechanics Global Institute, Nairobi Expansion Project." Eleanor watched his reaction carefully. "We are building training centers worldwide," she said. "Not to replace seasoned technicians, but to create opportunities where they didn't exist. Places where young people can learn a trade that will change the course of their lives." She paused, then added, "We need instructors, leaders, people who have walked through fire and come out with humility instead of bitterness. People who know what it feels like to start from nothing." Malik felt his breath catch. "And you think that's me?" Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She folded her hands, studying him in a way that made him feel both seen and evaluated. "I think," she said slowly, "that your character is rare, and rare is invaluable." The words struck somewhere deep, not flattering, not overwhelming, simply honest enough to feel true. "But let me be clear," she continued. "I am not offering you a charity role. I'm offering you an opportunity. A position as senior technical instructor with a structured fast track into leadership if you excel." He stared at her, stunned and speechless. "Your flight this morning may have closed one door," she said, "but life doesn't work the way airline schedules do. Sometimes missed flights are simply rerouted paths." Malik looked out the jet window, watching the orange line of the sunset stretch across the horizon. He thought of Zara, of Evelyn, of all the times he had wondered if his chance to become something more had already passed. He swallowed. It's a lot." "It is," Eleanor agreed. "And I don't expect an answer tonight. You still have an interview tomorrow, and you should go." She offered a small smile. A man deserves to choose his future, not stumble into it. The jet carried them steadily through the sky toward Seattle, a city where he had expected rejection, and now carried a second chance he could never have imagined that morning. Eleanor closed the folder and folded her hands neatly atop it. "When you're ready, Mr. Thompson," she said quietly, "you'll know." And as the aircraft sliced through the sky, Malik realized something he had never allowed himself to believe. For the first time in years, His future wasn't slipping away. It was opening. Seattle greeted him with a different kind of chill. Not the sharp desert cold of Phoenix, but a dampness that seemed to seep into his clothes the moment he stepped off the jet. The sky hung heavy with gray clouds, the kind that made the entire city appear to be holding its breath. A car from North Star dropped him at a modest downtown hotel. Nothing fancy, simply a place to rest and prepare before facing the interview he had thought was lost. Malik barely slept. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day's events. The scam, the closed gate, the exhaustion, the note, the SUV, the jet, Eleanor's offer, the folder of plans. Every piece felt unreal, like scenes from two different stories spliced together. And somewhere in the middle of it all, he had to decide which version of himself he would present the next morning. When dawn broke, Seattle's skyline remained wrapped in fog. Malik dressed in the same pressed shirt he had ironed the night before leaving Phoenix, smoothing it over and over, despite the wrinkles that refused to disappear. It wasn't new, but it was the best he had. He checked his reflection. Tired eyes, steady posture, jaw set with quiet determination. That would have to be enough. The Silverhawk Automotive Building stood in the center of downtown, all mirrored glass and sharp angles, the kind of structure that wanted you to know it took itself seriously. Inside, the lobby blended modern minimalism, gray walls, chrome lines, a receptionist who spoke in a carefully measured tone. 15th floor, she told him with a practiced smile. Suite 1502. The elevator ride up felt unnervingly quiet, his reflection staring back from the mirrored walls. For a brief second, he wondered if he belonged here. He pushed the thought away. Doubt wouldn't help him now. When he stepped into the suite, a man in a fitted suit approached with a professionally rehearsed grin. He extended a hand. Malik Thompson? Derek Sullivan, Director of Technical Operations. Malik shook his hand firmly. Morning, sir. Glad you made it, Derek said, as he led him into a conference room. We weren't sure after the flight delay notice. Malik stiffened. You got that alert? Derek shrugged casually. Airlines notify recipients when candidates miss their scheduled flights. Fortunately for you, we hadn't filled the slot yet. A small wave of relief washed over Malik, but it lasted only a moment. However, Derek continued, we value punctuality here. A missed flight isn't a great sign. Malik kept his face calm. Understood. It won't happen again. Derek nodded once, accepting the answer, but not appearing impressed. He gestured for Malik to sit, then launched into the interview without ceremony. What's your experience with third-generation hybrid engines? How quickly can you diagnose a failing control module without digital assistance? Describe your process for supervising apprentices in a high-output environment. Malik answered each question with the fluency of a man who had lived under the hoods of vehicles for 2 decades. He didn't embellish or oversell. He spoke plainly because everything he knew had been learned the hard way, not from manuals, but from scraped knuckles and long nights solving problems no one else wanted to touch. Derek nodded along, jotting notes, occasionally raising an eyebrow in approval. It was going well until the shift came. Small, subtle, but sharp. So, Derek said, leaning back in his chair, if we move forward, you'd be working under our technical supervisor, Brandon Hayes. Just joined us last year. Bright guy. Fresh masters from Michigan State. Malik didn't respond immediately. 20-plus years of experience reporting to someone barely 30. There was nothing wrong with education or young leaders, but he recognized what it meant. The ceiling here wasn't going to rise for him. It was already in place. Derek moved on. Hours are 6 to 4:30, Monday through Saturday. Overtime encouraged, sometimes required, depending on backlog. That landed harder than expected. 6 days a week, nearly 11-hour days. No mention of flexibility. No mention of family. Then came the number. Starting salary, $59,000 annually. Benefits included. Performance review at 18 months. $59,000. It wasn't nothing, but it wasn't life-changing either. Not enough to give Zara the childhood she deserved. Not enough to secure reliable medical care for Evelyn. Not enough to undo the years of struggle. Derek closed his notebook. We have one other candidate. He's waiting on an offer from another company. So if you want this job, I'd need your answer by 10 tomorrow morning. No later. There it was. The deadline. Cold. Clean. Corporate. Malik nodded once. I'll give you my decision by then. Good, Derek said, standing to shake his hand again. We appreciate men with discipline. Malik walked out with the same steady pace he had entered. But inside, something was quietly unraveling. The elevator descended slowly, each floor's ding a reminder of the choice waiting for him. When he stepped back onto the street, the Seattle air felt heavier. Cool mist clung to his jacket, lights reflecting off wet concrete like a city caught between day and night. He looked up at the glass tower he had just left. It wasn't a bad job. It wasn't a trap. It wasn't unfair. It was safe. A straight line. A predictable path. And once, that might have been enough. But now all he could think about was the way Eleanor had looked at him on the jet. Not with doubt or scrutiny, but with a kind of recognition he hadn't felt in years. As if she saw something in him that he had almost forgotten was still there. His phone buzzed. A hotel text reminding him of a dinner reservation, confirmed courtesy of Ms. Whitfield. He exhaled slowly. Two paths lay before him, one familiar, one terrifying. And somehow he knew tonight's dinner wasn't just a meal. It was the crossroads. The restaurant, perched on the top floor of the Elliott Bay Tower, looked more like a scene from a film than a place ordinary people dined. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Seattle skyline, a mosaic of city lights flickering against the evening fog. Inside, the lighting was warm and soft, almost intimate, as if the world had decided to quiet itself just long enough for something important to happen. Malik stepped out of the elevator, gently tugging at the collar of his pressed shirt. He felt underdressed the moment the maitre d' greeted him. The other diners wore tailored suits and designer dresses. He wore the best clothes he owned, clothes that still carried the memory of where he came from. But before the awkwardness could settle, he saw her. Eleanor Whitfield stood by the window, hands clasped loosely in front of her, posture straight, gaze fixed on the glowing city below. She didn't look restless or impatient. She looked ready, as if she had been preparing for this conversation all day. She turned the moment she sensed him approaching. "Mr. Thompson," she said with a warm, genuine smile. "You look exhausted, and like you handled the interview with more grace than most would after the day you had." Malik let out a breath that was half a laugh. "I'm not sure about grace. I survived it, though." "Well," she replied, motioning for him to join her at the table. "Survival is a skill, too." They sat across from each other, a candle flickering between them. A server poured water, set down 2 menus, then disappeared with the quiet precision of someone trained to vanish at the right moments. For a moment, neither spoke. The city did the talking, the soft hum of distant traffic, the muted glow of ferries moving across the bay, the quiet clink of silverware from nearby tables. Then Eleanor folded her hands and looked at him with an expression that blended kindness with clear-eyed business sense. "Tell me about your interview." Malik inhaled slowly, choosing his words. "It went fine. Derek, the director, seems fair, knows his stuff. The company's solid, but—" She prompted gently. "But—" He hesitated. "It's a ceiling, a stable one, but it's there." Eleanor nodded as if she had expected that answer. "Stability isn't something to dismiss," she said. "But settling is." She didn't say it harshly. She said it like someone who understood exactly what settling cost over time. Malik shifted in his chair. The hours are long. The pay's okay, but not enough to fix what needs fixing back home. And I'd be working under someone half my age. He took a sip of water, the glass trembling slightly in his hand. It's honest work. It would keep the lights on. But she waited. He stared at the tablecloth for a long moment. It wouldn't change anything. Eleanor leaned back, studying him, not judging, not pressuring, simply listening. After a while, she opened the folder she had brought and slid it across the table toward him. The same folder from the jet, the same emblem embossed on the cover. The future, in paper form. I want to show you exactly what we're building, she said. Malik hesitated, then opened it. Inside were updated schematics of the Nairobi expansion, training hangars, dormitories, classroom layouts, photographs of the community the center would serve. Faces of young people with bright eyes and calloused hands. The kind of kids who had potential, but no path. Kids who reminded him of himself years earlier. Eleanor continued, her voice softer now. My husband was a pilot, she said. 34 years with the company. He died in a maintenance accident overseas, one that could have been prevented if the local crews had been trained properly. Malik looked up, startled. She rarely spoke of personal matters. She went on. That loss shaped every decision I've made since. I don't build training centers for profit, Mr. Thompson. I build them so that someone else's loved one comes home. The words landed heavily, not manipulative, not dramatic, simply honest in the way truth often is. Malik didn't know what to say, so she continued. And I've learned something in all these years at the helm of a company larger than most cities. Talent matters, but character. She tapped the folder. Character is non-negotiable. She let that settle before adding, You didn't know who I was this morning. You didn't help because you thought it would get you somewhere. You helped because that is who you are. That is why I need you. The next moment stretched quiet, heavy, fragile, and important. The kind of moment that stays with you for years. Malik exhaled. If I take this, I'd be moving my daughter to Kenya, leaving everything familiar. Starting over, Eleanor nodded, and walking toward something extraordinary. He blinked, emotion tightening his throat. Extraordinary. No one had used a word like that in connection with his life in a long time, perhaps ever. He flipped through the pages again. Pictures, plans, futures about to be shaped. Then he thought of Zara, the way she had hugged him that morning, the drawing still in his wallet. Daddy, this is your big day. He pressed a hand lightly to his pocket, feeling the outline of the paper inside. His daughter's belief in him had always been bigger than his own. Eleanor watched him quietly, seeing the shift happening within him. She didn't push. She didn't sweeten the offer. She simply waited. Finally, she slid a slim pen across the table. You don't have to decide tonight, she said. But if you do, we start your training next week. Malik picked up the pen, turned it once between his fingers, then again. His heartbeat wasn't frantic or frightened anymore. It was steady. He signed, not with flourish, not with hesitation, but with certainty. When he looked up, Eleanor smiled. Not triumphant, not relieved, just deeply approving. Good, she said softly. You chose the harder road, the right road. Malik leaned back, the weight in his chest lighter than it had felt in years. The skyline outside remained foggy, but for him, the path forward had never been clearer. The Kenyan sun wasn't shy about making its presence known. It stretched across the tarmac in long amber beams, warming the metal roofs and newly painted hangars of the Nairobi Aviation Training Center, the crown jewel of North Star's mechanics initiative. The air carried a blend of jet fuel, dust, and possibility, a combination Malik had grown so accustomed to that he sometimes forgot it had once felt foreign. He stood on the observation deck overlooking the facility, hands on his hips, North Star badge clipped to his dark blue instructor uniform, the rising sun emblem stitched above his heart. Time had passed since that pivotal day, yet some mornings still struck him the same way, as if he had awakened in a life borrowed from a better man. Below him, 2 apprentices, local young men barely 20, worked carefully through a hydraulic systems drill. Their movements were slow but confident, the result of hours spent watching, repeating, failing, fixing, and learning. Malik watched closely, nodding with quiet pride. They were good. Damn good. And the swell of pride in his chest came not only from their progress, but from knowing he had helped shape it. A voice behind him called out, "Chief Malik, we need your eyes over here." He turned to see one of the trainees waving him over, smiling with the kind of excitement Malik remembered from his own early days. "Coming?" he called back, raising a hand. But before he could step away, a black SUV rolled through the front gate, gliding across the dirt road as if it belonged on any terrain. The vehicle needed no nameplate. Everyone here knew exactly who rode inside. Eleanor Whitfield, even now, after all this time, her presence still lifted the energy of the compound. She stepped out, moving more slowly than she once had, but still with that unmistakable authority in her posture. Her linen blazer fluttered slightly in the warm breeze, and her sunglasses caught the sun just enough to flash like a quiet announcement. "The boss is here." Malik made his way down the stairs as she approached. When they met, he extended a hand with a grin he didn't bother hiding. "Ms. Whitfield, welcome back." She took his hand, holding it a second longer than necessary. "You look like you belong here," she said, her eyes taking in the uniform, the sun-touched skin, the confidence. "I knew you would." "I feel like I do," he admitted. "Most days." They walked together toward the main hangar, passing trainees who nodded respectfully, some whispering, some failing to hide their excitement. To these young people, Eleanor wasn't just a CEO. They had grown up hearing her name in aviation news, seeing her face in articles about global training initiatives. And to them, Malik wasn't just an instructor. He was the man who refused to give up on them, who stayed after hours, who spoke to them as if they mattered. Inside the hangar, Eleanor paused, taking in the organized activity. Apprentice teams gathered around engine models. A trio examined a faulty pressure valve. Someone clanged a wrench against a toolbox. It looked like any good mechanic shop. Loud, purposeful, alive. "They know who you are," she said. Malik gave a modest shrug. "They know I show up. That's enough." "No," she corrected softly. "You are the reason they show up." The words reached him more deeply than he expected. As they walked, she glanced around with a kind of maternal pride, stopping occasionally to greet trainees or inspect progress. She moved more slowly these days, but her presence remained sharp, like a lighthouse that didn't need to shout to guide ships. Eventually, they stepped outside again, where the sun had shifted toward late afternoon, casting long shadows across the red earth. Eleanor turned to him, her expression shifting from admiration to business. "So," she said lightly. "So?" he echoed. "São Paulo is next." He raised an eyebrow. "Already?" She nodded. "Construction begins soon. We'll need a lead instructor, someone who can build the foundation the way you built this one." Malik took a breath, feeling that familiar mix of intimidation and excitement. "You're offering me the job. I'm offering you the choice," she corrected with a small smile. He looked around the compound, at the trainees tightening bolts with careful hands, at the instructors who now relied on him, at the horizon that had become his home. He thought of Zara, now living in Nairobi with him, speaking Swahili phrases at the breakfast table, asking questions about airplanes as if she had been born with aviation in her blood. He thought of Evelyn, whose health had improved since North Star provided insurance that actually covered her needs. He thought of everything this place had given him that Seattle never could have. Then his gaze returned to Eleanor. "You know," he said, "not long ago, I fell asleep on a metal airport bench, thinking my life had hit a dead end." She smiled softly, knowingly. "And now?" she asked. He looked out across the airfield again, at the red dirt, the bright sun, the young mechanics who already looked up to him as if he had been there for years rather than months. A soft breeze carried the distant hum of aircraft engines, a sound he had once only admired from afar, but now felt connected to. "Now," he said, "I feel like I'm just getting started." Eleanor chuckled, rolling her shoulders slightly. "That's what I hoped you'd say." She turned back toward the SUV. Before climbing in, she pushed her sunglasses up and looked at him one last time. "And Malik, thank you," she said quietly, "for carrying my bags that day." He smiled. No words were needed. She stepped into the SUV, the door closing with that same smooth, quiet thud he remembered from Phoenix. As the vehicle pulled away, dust rising behind it, Malik stood still for a moment, letting the quiet settle around him. The plaque beside the main building shimmered under the sun. Aviation Mechanics Global Institute, Nairobi. Behind him, new futures were unfolding, wrenches in hand, hope in their eyes. Ahead of him, another path waited in Sao Paulo, a new center, a new beginning. He didn't know which road he would choose yet, but he wasn't afraid of choosing anymore, because sometimes the flight you miss is simply the runway you needed. In the quiet heat of the Kenyan afternoon, while the SUV carrying Eleanor disappeared into a cloud of red dust, Malik remained exactly where he stood, feet planted, hands on his hips, shoulders lifted just slightly the way they do when a man realizes he has finally stepped into a life that fits. He watched the students move around the field, calling out to each other, laughing, debating torque measurements and safety checks, their voices weaving into a rhythm that had become the soundtrack of his days. He thought back to Phoenix, the scammers, the stumble, the tremor in that woman's hands, the split-second decision to stop, the boarded gate, the closed flight, the dead battery, the quiet bench. It all felt like a different lifetime. And yet, without any of it, he wouldn't be here. That's the kind of twist life never warns you about. You think you're watching a door slam shut when really it's the sound of another one unlocking. Malik glanced toward the office window where the framed note hung above his desk. The same slip of paper that had once felt like a riddle. Do not leave the airport. Back then, it had confused him. Now, it grounded him. Because that message wasn't about airports at all. It was about life. Sometimes the place you think you're stuck in is exactly where your blessing is coming to find you. He let the warm wind brush over his face as a pair of young trainees jogged past, trading joking insults about who had stripped a bolt the week before. He laughed under his breath. This place, this dusty, sunlit workshop in the heart of East Africa, had taken every version of him and opened it wider. As an instructor, as a leader, as a father. He reached into his pocket, feeling the edges of Zara's drawing, now folded carefully like something sacred. In the picture, the airplane was too large, the people stick-thin, the sun a bright yellow, but she had drawn him smiling. And that, for the longest time, had been the hardest part to believe. Now he smiled without thinking. The center hummed behind him, engines testing, tools clanking, futures forming. It was messy and loud and alive, and he belonged to it completely. He took one last look at the horizon, wide, warm, possible, and headed back toward the hangar, ready to teach the next lesson, ready to shape the next pair of hands, ready for whatever road came next. Because sometimes a missed flight isn't a failure. It's a reroute, a recalibration, a new runway you never expected. And sometimes the smallest choices, a pause, "Hey ma'am, are you okay?" a step toward instead of away, become the turning points that shift everything. If this story moved you even a little, don't let it end here. Hit that like button so the algorithm knows you want more stories like this. Subscribe if you believe kindness still has a place in this world. And turn on the notification bell, because tomorrow we're dropping another story that just might change the way you look at your day. Until then, be the person who stops. You never know who's watching or what runway you're about to land on.